Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today's session. Excuse me. Today's session is on sharing your expertise shaping local comprehensive plans. We're excited to have you here today. My name is Laura Hodgson. I'm a senior planner at the Department of Commerce. I've worked here for about 4 years, and I've been working on helping communities plan for the next 20 years of growth. And with that, we'd love to share how you can get involved in that planning process that's going to be going on in your local communities all across the state. I have with me here today Jason. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, so.
That's Gauthier.
Gauthier, from the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners, who will be talking about how to get involved at a local and or regional level. And then we have Tiffany Speir from the city of Lakewood, who will be, as an urban planner, will talk about how she would like you to get involved in your local planning process, because you have an important voice to play in planning for your growth in your communities. I think you know commerce through the lens of housing, but commerce strengthens communities in all aspects of their community development. And we are here today to talk to you not only about housing, but also planning. So in addition to funding housing, we help communities plan for the next 20 years of growth and make sure they have the infrastructure and the policies and the framework in place to support that growth and put it and direct it to places where it can best meet people's needs. So today I'd like to start out with the state planning framework. This is the framework which will basically allow you to comment and input on where growth goes in your community. And it starts out with the Growth Management Act. How many of you are familiar with the Growth Management Act here? All right, most of you. So I'm going to kind of breeze through my part and let the experts take over. But the Growth Management Act was adopted in 1990 to help better coordinate planning for our state. They were seeing a lot of uncoordinated development and urban sprawl in my neighborhood. I think I was actually one of the poster childs for why they started the Growth Management Act in Pierce County. No offense to Pierce County, just my part is rather sprawly. But it also impinged on this sprawling growth, impinged on our great quality of life and our natural resources, which we treasure and love so much in Washington. And so the growth management requires the state planning framework that is regionally enforced, but allows local governments to develop the vision for their own communities as long as it's consistent with the goals of the state. And those goals of the state include 15 planning goals, which are what every jurisdiction who plans for in Washington should try to achieve as they plan for the growth in their community. They range from encouraging compact urban growth and reducing sprawl, and of course planning for housing, to ensuring the availability of public facilities, encouraging historic preservation, and managing shoreline development. The two key pieces of the Growth Management Act that I want to point out to you today are the planning for and accommodating housing affordable to all economic segments. This goal was changed in 2021, which I'll talk about in a minute, and encouraging citizen participation. A key factor for how we plan for growth in our communities is based on community input. We want to understand what our communities want to see and how they want to grow, and that plays into how we plan for our growth and why hopefully you're here in this room today, because we're going to talk about how you can be engaged in that process.
Quick question, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're derail here. Does maintain natural resources, does that include agriculture, or is it just forestry and other stuff?
Let's see here. Yes, I was going to say, I assume so, but I hadn't done the agricultural plan. So yes, it does. And that's actually one of the key tenets of Growth Management Act, is to make sure that we're preserving that agricultural land. That falls into that bucket. Yes, thank you for asking. So under the state planning framework, we have these 15 goals that are supposed to guide all planning as we plan for our growth in our communities. Within that framework, there is a nesting hierarchy of planning frameworks that unfold under that. Under that, if you are in the Puget Sound region, the central Puget Sound region, so King, Kitsap, Pierce, and Snohomish County, you have multi-county planning policies. Because it's the largest and most populous region of the state, coordinated planning is important to make sure that we're coordinating where growth goes, we're having the resources, we have the infrastructure, and we're working together in this area where so many people live. So if you're in that area, then you have multi-county planning policies. These are policies that are developed at a regional level to help communities grow in a coordinated fashion. From there, every county has their own policies. Those are countywide planning policies. Again, this is to make sure that we are regionally coordinating our planning for growth and making sure that we have the infrastructure and services that dovetail with our needs. Then from there, each local community, each city and town has a comprehensive plan. This is the framework for how they will allow and accommodate growth moving forward. So this provides the framework for where growth goes, where the transportation infrastructure goes, where the utilities go, and basically provides the framework for capital spending and infrastructure moving forward so that communities can thrive. And they're implemented through development regulations. And this is probably, as an affordable housing developer, if you are one, this is where you probably interact with it the most. But development regulations, which are the laws that guide what you can build on your property and where you can build and how many units you can build, is guided by this larger hierarchy of planning framework. So it's important to understand this larger hierarchy of planning framework and make sure that vision that is set in this larger hierarchy in the green, orange, and items which are influenced by local community input is guided by the local vision. And that local vision will be updated in every community across Washington over the next 4 years. So every community will be updating their comprehensive plan, which guides where they fund infrastructure and therefore where growth will go in their communities over the next 4 years with their comprehensive plan update and the regulations that are the rules that implement that plan. So now is the perfect time to provide your input and advocacy for how we want to accommodate that growth. Where do we think that there needs to be more housing and more affordable housing? Is it on the fringes of our communities? Probably not. And if it should be in the center of our communities, what does that shape and form look like, and how do we make sure that we get the services there that we need? All of those are guiding factors that you can influence in your comprehensive plan. But specifically within the housing element, this is how jurisdictions plan for housing. And obviously, since you're at Housing Washington, this is probably your focus. As I mentioned, in 2021, the legislature changed the goal for planning for housing that everybody must, under the umbrella, meet at a larger scale. And instead of encourage the availability of affordable housing, local governments must now plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments. That means they need to take a larger and more proactive role in making sure that the framework is there to allow housing to be built in their communities that meets the community's needs. To understand what those community needs are, the legislature directed the Department of Commerce to identify what those housing needs were. In the past, local governments were able to choose how much they would grow, and they would interpret that into a number of household units, and they would just plan for that number of household units. Unfortunately, that did not always mean that we were planning for the types of housing that people can afford. Now, with this directive, the legislature has asked Commerce to determine how many housing units do we need at various affordability levels to make sure that people can live within their means in the communities where they want to live. And so we have developed the projected housing needs, which I'll show you on the next slide, for every income bracket. So I think most of you are familiar with income brackets. The housing needs are broken down into all the income brackets that we typically fund as affordable housing developers, and for the first time included emergency housing and permanent supportive housing in those projections. Then local governments are tasked with planning for and making sure the framework of their local zoning and regulations can accommodate that housing. So that means that do they have the right zoning in place that allow the types of housing to be built that can meet these housing needs that were identified. So that's the sufficient land capacity for housing needs, which I'll go over in a minute. But also the legislature directed local governments to work to identify those barriers to affordable housing. We've not been building the type of housing that we need that is affordable to residents. So many people in Washington are cost burdened or can't even afford housing. So what are those barriers? And now the legislature's directed local governments to come up with an action plan to remove those barriers. And for the first time, to really address those inequities that Lisa was talking about at her plenary speak this morning, is jurisdictions need to identify what policies and regulations have led to racially disparate impacts, exclusion, and displacement in their communities. Basically, what have we as local governments instituted in our laws and policies that have prevented people from having equal access to housing, and housing where they that is available to everybody where they want to live. And so the legislature's directed local governments to look into that, and I'll talk about that as my last piece before I transition into how Tiffany at the City of Lakewood isn't taking this framework and wants your input to influence the work that they'll be doing, and how you can then influence your local government planning work to guide housing for the next 20 years. So as I mentioned, there's a huge need for housing. I think this is not lost on anybody in this room, but what was kind of startling is how much need there is at the lower income segments. And by direction from our advisory committee with the stakeholders across the state, and really understanding the legislature's intent to make sure that we are planning for housing that is affordable to residents of Washington, meaning they're not spending more than 30% of their income, we had to take into account eliminating cost burdening for those for which data was available for renters. And in doing so, the data showed us that so many people in Washington are living cost burdened that to make sure that they have housing that they can afford within their means that we need to put in extra effort at planning for their lower income housing needs, as this shows. The next step, now that jurisdictions will have those numbers from the Department of Commerce, which they will get at a countywide level, and decide collectively at the county level where that growth will go, and they'll decide where the different income housing needs should go within their communities. Communities then will need to identify the land capacity for those housing needs. And what that means is that, is there enough capacity does the zoning on the ground allow for the type of housing development that could be affordable to these residents? We understand from a planning perspective that to build the amount of lower income housing that we need across the state will take major investments from local, state, and federal partners in the local government. But we still need to allow the housing to be built that is more affordable generally from the first place. And so what we need to do is make sure that we can build those moderate density housing options. For example, a duplex or a triplex is going to be more affordable than a single family home. An accessory dwelling unit is a great first way to have an affordable housing opportunity as a new somebody right out of college or high school, or somebody who's downsizing from a unit, or a townhouse. Unfortunately, that's not allowed in most jurisdictions in a majority of the residential zones. So communities have the framework of zoning that will allow the housing that's affordable to jurisdictions? And if they don't have that zoning that will allow housing that's more affordable to meet their local needs, jurisdictions will, when they update their comprehensive plan, also need to update their zoning to make sure they have the land capacity for all of those identified housing needs. What this means in a lot of jurisdictions is that a lot of jurisdictions will likely find that they don't have enough capacity for the lower income housing needs. As I mentioned, a lot of our communities in Washington are primarily single family zones. They are, as I heard in a previous presentation, 60% or 70% of most jurisdictions up until the past few years only allowed one residence on a lot. That's very expensive. That is not affordable to the needs that we saw in the previous slide. So jurisdictions will need to add land zone for more moderate density housing types, more units on a lot, and more of that moderate density housing, for example, multifamily housing, that can be more affordable when it is built if it has the funding sources. Jurisdictions will also need to make sure that they have the infrastructure to accommodate that growth. As we add more units to the land, we have to make sure that we have the services for that. And that means providing the water, sewer, and transportation infrastructure, as well as utilities to those services. And identifying where those services need to go is something that planners will be doing in their next comprehensive plan update. So you have a voice in influencing where that growth and those local investments go. And cities will also need to make sure that they're allowing emergency housing and permanent supportive housing in more zones to meet those housing needs, because those are in many ways not outlawed, but restricted significantly in most jurisdictions, and we have a huge need. Two other components that I'm going to speak to that jurisdictions will be doing in their comprehensive plans that I think that you can weigh into, and your organizations can weigh into, setting the stage for the next 4 years that I want to speak to, and then again, I'll turn it over to Tiffany. But jurisdictions also need to, what they call, make adequate provisions for affordable housing. I don't think anybody really totally knew what that meant prior to a few years ago, but the legislature specified what they meant in 2021, and the main piece of that is that local governments need to identify the barriers to affordable housing and develop an action plan to remove those barriers. So local governments over the next 4 years will be asking their community, asking their affordable housing developers, what are the reasons why you can't or you don't want to build in our community because there are restrictions? And then coming up with an action plan to identify what solutions are available to remove those barriers. As affordable housing developers, advocates, you know that better than sometimes the planners do, and it's a great opportunity for you to share and influence that piece. We've come up with some documents. If you're not an affordable housing developer but an affordable housing advocate, we've come up with a framework for jurisdictions to do that review, and it might be helpful for you to look at and say, what are the barriers to affordable housing development using this framework of possible barriers that we see in many jurisdictions. And we also have a pre-filled out example of how this may look in comprehensive plans. So if you are following your process, local government process, and you don't see in your comprehensive plan for your local government a list of barriers and a list of actions to address those barriers, ask your planner, call it out, ask them. This is what one of the new requirements and one of the key things that we're going to be able to do to remove those barriers to affordable housing development, which are widespread. The last piece and very important piece of housing elements that local governments will need to do is address racially disparate impacts. I'm not going to be able to restate anything better than what was stated this morning at the plenary speak, but because of the disparate impacts we see in the housing inequalities and the wealth gap between whites and blacks and or Washington members of other races, we want to make sure that from a planning perspective, we're doing everything we can to right those wrongs. And the legislature's asked local governments to do that in their comprehensive plans. And through coordinating with a variety of stakeholders from nonprofit organizations and planners throughout the state, we've developed what we think is a recommended way to evaluate what that framework is. And that is first engaging with those people in your community who might have been disparately impacted and analyzing the data to see if you have disparate impacts in your communities. And as a side note, most jurisdictions are going to see disparate impacts and they're going to see exclusion. And what that means is that jurisdictions will need to take a hard look at their policies and their comprehensive plan that again set the framework for the zoning and the infrastructure investments in their communities, and make sure that they are not skewed towards continuing the status quo. For example, I heard in the last session that Spokane had a policy that says protect single-family zoning. Well, that is has led to the situation we are in today where there are disparate impacts. And so revising that key policy will make sure that the framework is in place to allow the zoning changes to create more equitable housing for everyone in our communities. And what that means then is then developing the regulations and programs that will then implement those policies, such as increasing affordable housing production, preserving affordable housing, as we heard about at our lunch speaker, allowing people to stay in the communities that they're in and preventing people from being displaced, and a wide variety of, there are a wide variety of strategies and regulations that jurisdictions can do to implement each of those pieces to address racially disparate impacts. And in closing, I want to note that there are also a few other housing laws in addition to this comprehensive plan framework that we encourage you to be involved with in your local community. There are a few other laws that are important to know as we advocate for our housing needs moving forward. And those are that jurisdictions can adopt incentives to encourage affordable housing. We are not going to meet our housing needs just by creating a zoning framework and removing the barriers to affordable housing. We need every tool in the shed to get there. We certainly need more funding, as was mentioned at our lunch speaker's presentation, and federal policies, but we also need incentives. We need to be able to work with affordable housing developers to figure out ways to do a give and take with our regulations for the greater public benefit of more affordable housing. And jurisdictions have a number of tools to do that, and if they're not currently available in your local jurisdiction, I suggest that you and encourage you to advocate for them to be put in their local comprehensive plan. Also, counties, cities, and local governments may not adopt, impose, or enforce requirements on an affordable housing development that are different than the requirements imposed on housing development generally. This is as jurisdictions plan for more emergency housing and permanent supportive housing and very low-income housing in their jurisdictions. We are seeing as jurisdictions submit their development regulations to us that they are not always abiding by this. They are putting some more barriers in place for affordable housing development and emergency housing that they don't for other housing. So something to keep in mind as you move forward, that is a no-no, and to call them out on it. And if you have more questions on that, let me know. But I am over time, so I'm going to switch to Tiffany here, and thank you very much.
So good afternoon, everyone. Some of you I may know over the years and some I don't. Tiffany Speir with the City of Lakewood. In my past life prior to this position I hold, I was with the Master Builders here in Pierce County. So I was an advocate myself for about 16 years on the for-profit as well as some nonprofit memberships behalf. And then I was also with the county prior to coming to the City of Lakewood. So with that background, I try to always have a perspective of what does the market ask for, what does the market need, what do nonprofit providers need, as well as what is the public dialogue ongoing about housing. So I appreciate the ability to be here in front of you this afternoon. This is making sure it's me. Yes, okay, sorry. Some of this will be similar to what you saw from Laura's presentation at the start, but I just want to show that there actually now is the state language that says you shall, as a local government, engage with your public and seek feedback and input as you're developing your planning regulations and policy. So just keeping in mind, if you are an advocate coming across a jurisdiction that should be talking to you, to your organization, and they maybe are not, this is a great first step, not as an antagonistic way, but just to say, hey, we're here to help you, and we know that this is a rule you now have to follow. So it is something now that local governments are having to deal with. What you'll see here in blue language here, again, this is state statutory change in recent legislative cycles, but we are supposed to be notifying public and private groups with a known interest in a certain proposal, and we're supposed to be placing notices not only in the obscure newspaper of record, but in other areas where we know individuals who are interested in organizations will hear about it and know about it. So again, these are items where if you see a jurisdiction is maybe not doing everything it should, not assuming that was on purpose, but simply to let them know this is now the rule, so here's some suggestions on how to improve your outreach. Not intended to look at this in any detail, but simply to show jurisdictions do have in their own municipal or countywide codes rules about how they're supposed to do public engagement and outreach. And so again, this is a way for advocates to kind of track if there's a particular jurisdiction you're concerned about, what they're talking about. being aware of the process at not only the city or county council level, but the administrative and regulatory levels that precede that. So a planning commission, for instance, in the city of Lakewood, talks about things before it goes to the city council. This was a survey that was done just this year. It was released in July of 2023 by the Puget Sound Regional Council. They did an outreach to affordable housing developers wanting to understand how they saw the lay of the land these days. And there was a great quote that just talks about it's not the demand coming because of either for-profit or nonprofit developers. You are responding to a need, right? And in order to be able to meet the demand, there has to be partnership with cities and counties, local governments in order to meet that. You already saw this graphic from Laura, but again, just emphasizing there is this new requirement to not only say we're going to grow by so many people over the next 20 years, but we're going to be planning for specific numbers of housing units for various area median income brackets. And so for a jurisdiction, for instance, Lakewood, we have on our books over the next 20 years, we're going to grow by so many people total. But what we now have to do is say, and within that total, so many will be 0 to 30% either PSH or not. Some will be 120% of the area median income and everywhere in between. So this is a new step for local governments, and it's something that will be incorporated for sure into the 10-year periodic updates, which are ongoing in Pierce County right now, and then it goes to Thurston County and some other jurisdictions over the next few years. And this is why you're suddenly going to maybe have a happier face at the counter or over the phone when you're talking to local governments, because I think everybody would accept the premise that anything that's below about 80% AMI is not going to be something that for-profit developers are able to provide in quantity. It's going to be the nonprofit subsidized housing that does that, fills that need. So local governments need to be working with nonprofits and seeking participation and interest to build in their respective jurisdictions over time in order to satisfy this new requirement. Again, please don't try to read that, but the idea here is across the state, because of state action, we now have for every county numbers total and then by area median income. And as Laura mentioned, this is step one of a process by which a county then interacts with its cities and says, okay, this is the total number. How does it make sense to divvy up these among the various jurisdictions? Pierce County has completed this process with all of its cities, and so everybody now has this number. If you were to go to Tacoma or Lakewood or anywhere else, you would be able to say, okay, we know so many below 80% AMI, for instance, now has to be provided. This is the tool, the guts, the sausage making, if you will, for this process. Commerce developed this tool after the Bill 1220 was passed a few years ago, where by going first and selecting your county, the year you're projecting growth for, and then the amount of total growth or total population you are assuming, it then breaks it out into those various area median incomes. And this is something that, again, if you want to have background before you start talking to a local government, you can certainly access this very easily online and understand what those numbers are. So when the discussion starts, you're already informed about it. So looking at Lakewood specifically, just a little background. We are a city that's the second largest in the county. We have about 64,000 people right now. We are a young city, meaning we incorporated in 1996, as opposed to Tacoma, which has been around for over 150 years or something, and there's other jurisdictions that are also much older. Edgewood and Lakewood and University Place all incorporated in 1996, 1997, in part in response to the Growth Management Act, but also because it was just time, based on the growth in those areas of the then unincorporated county, to create a more formal local government. But what that does is affect our land use planning. So it wasn't like there was this organic Port of Tacoma, downtown Tacoma with the rails, that became the center of the city that's then expanded. It's in Lakewood, it was catch as catch can, if you will. Private development happened over the years. You had also, for instance, Western State Hospital had been built there because at the time it was far away from the big population centers. Now it's in the middle of a city. So part of what we've been doing as a city is trying to turn ourselves into that who are we as an entity and where is our central core and what is our identity, not as just Pierce County, but as a city itself. The other piece to that is the city of Lakewood does not own any of its utilities. Those were already in place and predate. So Pierce County Sewer, Lakewood Water District, and then there's actually 3 different power companies that we interact with for city planning. And then there's also Comcast Internet Broadband Services and other things as well. I bring that up just to say, as you saw from Laura, there's now state law that says you have to be planning in your comprehensive plans for utility capacity. Well, that's one process, that's one way that a city who owns its utilities has to operate. If you are a jurisdiction like Lakewood that does not, it's that much more layer of pre-planning, trying to understand where those various third-party utilities are with their capacity and infrastructure expansion, and making sure they have all the accurate, up-to-date information regarding growth. So for us, it's going to be, okay, we now have these numbers specific to the city in terms of AMI and emergency housing units, for instance. We have to make sure that power, water, sewer, as well as our transportation system, those people that are doing that planning are also informed on these things. But just to look at this chart for a moment, you'll see in red that we have a total of almost 9,400 units that have to be now split among the area median income brackets. And then in addition to that, we have our emergency units. We do have 2 sub-area plans which were adopted prior to 1220 and then these more recent bills regarding housing in higher densities on each lot. And so now what we need to do is go back and review those sub-area plans as well, because at one point we were thinking about a quarter of our residential growth would be going into our downtown, and about another 20% would be going down by the Sounder Station in Lakewood. Those now have to be nuanced and expanded to talk about area median income needs and affordable housing needs in those sub-areas. This is the 2 sub-area boundaries, so they're pretty close to each other, but both of them have transit access because of I-5 and 512 being there, as well as Sounder. And so these are 2 areas also that were very much affected by 1110 and 1337, additional housing units per lot and additional accessory dwelling unit requirements. We do in our own policies in our sub-area plan right now have some anti-displacement and middle housing policies we'll have to review, making sure that the actual development code itself is builder friendly. Oops, what did I do? Oh no, I killed it. Sorry. In any event, Lakewood has a sub-area planning policy that says,
Check the input terminal.
okay,
I think it's here. There we go. I think that'll go now.
okay, sorry about that, thank you. Making sure that site design and building design are based on road types rather than on the building itself. So, go ahead. Instead of, for instance, in traditional zoning that says this is what this neighborhood is going to be and we're only going to allow these types of uses, we are saying along this road, whether it's a residential road or arterial road, we are going to say the buildings kind of look like this with this kind of height, but the number and type of uses inside, there's much more freedom and flexibility. And the intent there is to allow for change of use over time, yay, as well as, thank you, Laura, as well as flexibility in the type of residential development that can happen. Sorry, I'm not going to touch anything, the rest of it. Okay. The Lakewood sub-area plan specifically, this was done actually more recently than the downtown one, but it is a couple years old, and we'll have to update it based on the 3 bills I've been talking about. But this had a focus already on anti-displacement because of the existing residential development that was there, as well as the proximity to both Joint Base Lewis McChord. It's an enormous military base that's right there across I-5, and about 70% of those that work on JBLM as a service member actually live off base. So there's about 50,000 service members there. Most of them are not just in Lakewood, but up and down I-5 corridor in Pierce and Thurston counties. And that affects housing stock, housing demand, as well as parking and transportation needs. But we wanted to try to make sure in this area not to displace, particularly the area in the darker orange. That is considered one of the places in the city at higher risk of displacement because it's close to transportation and other types of development in the near area that would encourage developers to maybe try to buy people out and move them, displace them from their homes. So we're trying to balance that with economic development hopes that the city has, as well as now this idea of preserving and actually increasing housing in this area because it's close to transit. We do, as I mentioned, have multiple sub-area plans. All of these based on, actually just this 2 months ago now, the Puget Sound Regional Council's displacement map showed that there are displacement risks in all of these sub-areas. So again, that's going to be informing future reviews of these sub-areas to talk about how do we maintain how do we maintain and preserve existing housing that's worth keeping because of its affordability, compared to how do we increase density around transit, how do we increase density in keeping with these new state laws that say we need to do that, we have to do that, and how do we realistically plan our transportation system in particular for all this additional density, both in the sub-areas and outside. Lakewood is one of those jurisdictions that does not have on-street parking, meaning if you've got suddenly not one dwelling unit on a lot, but 3 or more, where are these people going to park? It's not going to be on the street. How are we going to fit on the acreage of a parcel all of the on-site parking that might be required? And or do we need to just go bite the bullet and look at our transportation planning and figure out where parking is going to happen? So this is a map that looks at 1110 and 1337 and where it might apply. And the reason I wanted to share this with you today is as you're going forward and advocating for affordable housing, whether it's in Lakewood or anywhere else, the bill is very clean and black and white, and it says across the board, this is where all of this has to happen. But it also has, there are areas where it will not apply. This in Lakewood is showing you, this is a critical area, that's a lake, that's a critical area. So there's parts of the city where in theory you would have housing units, but it's not going to happen because of environmental constraints. Over here, you can kind of see that U inside the 2 sets of dotted lines. Those are areas where you would actually do higher density because it's closer to transit. However, there's only so many areas of that are zoned residential at all. So for Lakewood at least, that was our first blush to say, okay, thank you very much, state legislature, we'll try to take these on, but as we do this analysis, we are going to have to make sure everybody in the dialogue understands it's not going to apply exactly the same across the board. And this is even a more recent map where we also took a look at our tree canopy, our Gary Oaks or Oregon white oak population in the city. And that also affects where things can happen because they are considered priority habitat for endangered species in some instances. So again, and this one you can see the blue essentially is where 1337 and 1110 will apply without question. The gold stuff toward the top, I don't know how well that's coming across, those are areas where there's historic covenants and restrictions that the legislature said, okay, if that's in place that says only so many units per acre in a plat, that's still going to govern, at least as of now. Maybe a future session is going to change that in Olympia. But that means that those lots might or might not be affected. And then you see the brighter pink, again, those are your critical areas. And then we do have a few spots where actually it's the size of the lot themselves, or it's already so filled with other structures and things that's just not going to work or not going to apply. So again, we're figuring out where this would work, and then we're having to take out those areas that, for whatever reason, environmental restrictions, the size of the lot, those CC&Rs, where it's not going to apply. And so again, just bringing to your attention that 1110, 1220, 1337 really affect land use planning locally, but there's also this second level of analysis that you're probably going to want to track and be sure you're understanding. So how to get involved and be able to provide good, informed, valued, meaning valued by the local government feedback. I always encourage people to go to mrsc.org because it's a great central website that takes you to every single jurisdiction and their websites, their codes. It's just a great one-stop shop to get started. Always be aware and attend things online. We're so lucky now. One good thing that came out of COVID is Zoom. I will be the one to say that, because if you are an advocate and you're trying to track multiple jurisdictions, you obviously can't be everywhere at once. You're able to watch things after the fact. You're able to do things remotely. It's a great way to get a little more engaged. Just understand as well the legislative schedule that a particular jurisdiction is on. Sometimes it's an annual process to review regulations and zoning. Sometimes it's every 2 years. Right now we're in this big 10-year review that's required by the state. So knowing that, and then also just proactively say hello. This is something where by doing so you're going to have more oomph in the long game. You're going to be able to come in and know you have a pre-existing relationship with the local government. You'll hear that a lot with state level advocacy, do stuff in between session, make friends with these guys when they're not pressed for time. I would encourage you to do the same at the local government level. And I mentioned the long game, but again, understanding the GMA and those other things that are influencing what a local government is doing in terms of housing, because it's not strictly this conversation, it's the other things that jurisdiction is dealing with as well. Providing information regularly versus just when something is coming up for a hearing next Tuesday night at 7, right? Being able to say, here we are, can we help you out? Can we engage with you over time versus just on a particular night? And then just, I'm not whining at all. I am just saying that government staff sometimes will not be able to give you the firm, clear, committed answer you may be wanting because there's these other dynamics going on. So just understanding that and working with people over time is where you're going to get the feedback and the responses that you want from them. This is one, if this is just my call out, if anybody's interested. Right now, Lakewood is talking about this, but other jurisdictions will be as well. 1337 is the one that says you have to have at least 2 accessory dwelling units on residential single-family lots. And if you're closer to transit, you can do 4, right? However, there is language in 1337 that also says local government, if you choose to, you can prohibit the use of ADUs as short-term rentals. Lakewood is actually advocating for that with its planning commission. We have a hearing tonight about it, and then in October, later in the month, it'll be in front of our council. The thought process here from the city's perspective is if what we're suddenly doing is opening up this new economic opportunity, if you want to name it that, for homeowners and landowners across our city, the result may not be what we want, which is affordable housing all of a sudden. It may suddenly turn into short-term rentals, which does not meet the purpose of 1337. So this would be a great opportunity for affordable housing providers to be able to come into a local jurisdiction as this comes up to explain 1337, if you look at what it was all about and what the state legislature was trying to do with this, was not to say go open up a bunch of Airbnbs. It was, this is an opportunity to suddenly increase our housing stock, more affordable to many. So please consider this prohibition, or please support the prohibition. So that's just an example of one where you could be advocating right now. It's not the comp plan, but it's something that's very closely tied to it. And I will step out of the way for Jason. Thank you.
All right, so I've got about 15 minutes. I'm going to go for 8 minutes so we can have a couple of questions at the end of this. Before I start with my introduction of who I am and why I'm talking, how many of you in this room are affordable housing developers? All right. How many of you would consider yourselves advocates? Okay, got it. I just would like to know who I'm speaking to. My name is Jason Gauthier. I'm the manager of the South Sound Housing Affordability Partners. SHAPE is an interlocal organization made up of 15 member governments, Pierce County, the Puyallup Tribe of Indians, and 13 cities and towns across Pierce County, representing more than 96% of the population of Pierce County. We work in 3 big buckets in service to those member governments. First, our program and policy work that's helping folks like Tiffany at the City of Lakewood with their adventures into the comprehensive plan, periodic update. That also includes grant writing and a bunch of other pieces of our work. Number 2 is our legislative advocacy, both at the federal and state level. And then number 3, this time next year, we'll be making our first capital awards to build more affordable housing. So that's what we do. I was asked to attend today to talk about how to collaborate in this comprehensive plan periodic update with your local government. So I come from an advocacy background. I was the director of government affairs for Habitat for Humanity in Pierce County for about 6 years prior to coming to this job. So I have a great deal of respect for Tiffany in her previous role, both educating and collaborating with local governments to make building more housing easier for the members at the Master Builders Association, as I did at Habitat for Humanity. So when I think about collaboration in the comprehensive plan, I think of 5 big areas to begin to work on to start off with. First is those alignment of goals. When you begin working with local government staff members, what are your goals? What are their goals? I think in the comprehensive plan periodic update, working under the 1220 framework, it's a pretty easy alignment of goals. Local government is working to accommodate more affordable housing and opportunities to create more affordable housing. And what do affordable housing developers do? They create affordable housing. See, call and response. Call and response. Thanks, Cliff. Cliff's also a Habitat for Humanity person, so we've dealt with each other. We also are looking for a shared vision. Collaboration, I believe, starts at a framework of that shared vision. That shared vision for housing is actually a little more in depth even. So when you're working with a city, how do they envision what they're planning for versus how do you envision what that city should be planning for? So does that city envision its housing growth taking place near high-capacity transit corridors? Do they envision that growth taking place in neighborhood and commercial centers? Or do they envision that growth occurring more in that infill middle housing typology? Or all of the above? But it's important to establish what their vision is so that your recommendations and your collaboration with them can align with how they're beginning to plan for that vision, for that growth for their community. I'm going to keep moving through that. I've got like another paragraph on that. Also, understanding the field experience. So that's field experience that it's a two-way street. So your field experience developing affordable housing, working through the planning and permitting and building stages with local government, and the field experience of those planners that you're going to be working with who often see the opposite side of that. When I was working for Habitat, I would often get called into our director of construction's office, and he would tell me that I needed to call the mayor or planning commissioners of cities to yell at them about slow permitting or some issues with the planning office. And my first question was always, well, where did we screw up here? Because I felt by asking that question, it was pretty clear, like, we're working on this together, right? And there might be an issue at the city, but there might be an issue with us as well. And often there's kind of an issue on both sides. So understand that we both have a field experience in beginning to collaborate. Best practices and examples, bringing those to the table is great as well. Also understand those planners you'll be working with in this process to provide them recommendations. They're going to have done that research as well and bringing those best practices and examples to the table. So collaboration is about a give and a take. It's about a conversation. So understand that you bringing those to the table are great. They're going to bring theirs to the table as well and be able to collaborate and work on those. And then collaboration is also about problem identification and solving. I myself am a better problem identifier than a problem solver, but the world needs more problem solvers. So working with your planners in the comprehensive plan update, great to identify problems. It's a priority of identifying those barriers to development, but also identifying solutions to those problems is, to me, the key for the advocate, for the developer community to bring to the table. I just want to highlight this slide. I took it from Laura. Just again, it's important to walk into this process understanding the framework that those planners are going to be working with under, and I'm just going to keep moving for the sake of time. Also, as I mentioned, understanding what local planners are working under. I have this slide up here for 2 reasons. Number one, just so you know, planners are doing a lot of work. Since 2019, the state legislature has passed 17 pieces of legislation dealing with local land use policy. So it's a lot of work. And it's not a woe is me slide that I put up here. It's also good to understand, again, the framework that local planners are working under. So some of the ideas that you might be bringing to the table might also be things that are requirements for those cities to be working on. My favorite example is House Bill 1377. I think it was passed either in the 2020 or 2021 legislative session. 1377 requires that cities develop incentives to incentivize affordable housing to be developed on religious organization-owned properties. The legislature gives no more sort of guidance than do this thing. So that's one that I think is a great opportunity for advocates and developers to come in to say, we know you have to do this. Here are those incentives that we would suggest, those density bonuses, those program policies that would help to both encourage those religious organizations to approach developers and then help developers build on that real estate. And then where to focus. Again, I'll try to fly through these. Number one, just be specific. Generalities are helpful, but I'm certain that Tiffany has heard plenty of times in her career at the city of Lakewood that permitting should be faster. That's great. Permitting should be faster, right? We want to move faster. Permitting should be faster. What are the specific barriers that you're running into? And what are those solutions to those barriers that you would suggest the city consider in their development regulations? Use examples as well. Examples are great, right? Use past, present, and future examples. I'll use an example right now. Just earlier this week, I got a call from an affordable housing developer in Pierce County talking about acquiring a piece of property that at this time is zoned for a capacity of about 90 units. Their message to me was, this is a great project, but the finances don't work unless we can get to about 120 units on this parcel. So I called the planning manager of that local city and asked the question, what flexibility could we have in the density maximums on this site to get that closer to that 120 unit mark? And their response was, everything's on the table in this comprehensive plan update. And these are the exact sort of things that we want developers to bring to us. We've seen a bunch of slides on the numbers of affordable housing units that have to be built. In Pierce County alone, Pierce County is planning for 111,000 total housing units in the next 20 years. About 70,000 of those are for households that are earning no more than 80% of the area median income. So moving the needle wherever we can is going to be critical for our local government. So bringing those current examples. If we do this, we would love to build 30 more units on this parcel. Bring that to the table in these meetings. Do your homework. We've had great two teachers today with Tiffany and Laura giving you a lot of that homework. Understand that framework that our local government is working under is really helpful. And that homework also, it's a two-way street. That's on local planners as well. If local planners are envisioning the majority of their growth occurring in high-density multifamily housing parts of the city, probably not the best idea to ask for a bunch of recommendations from low-density, single-family duplex home developers, because what they know is their recommendations aren't going to really align with what those cities are looking, how those cities are looking to grow. Know your audience and their capacity. Tiffany talked a little bit about sort of those water utilities, but long-range planners like Tiffany, they're going to know about the permitting process, but are they going to have an in-depth knowledge at all times of how exactly that permitting process works? Forgiveness to Tiffany, probably not. So it's important to know your audience, and it's okay to say, it's okay to sort of put on the shelf that topic for a follow-up meeting with the permitting department or the folks that you want to dive into a specific barrier and solutions for a later meeting. Know your business. I know as a former advocate, I used to, you get a little over your skis sometimes. Folks want recommendations on, what would get you to build more ADUs? Well, my organization didn't build ADUs, and I don't have much of a base of knowledge to tell you what would incentivize us to build ADUs. It's okay to say, that's not something that I'm not able to provide you an expert opinion on, but here's who can, and here's who I would recommend talking to about this. So know your business. And then answer the big question. Here's the big question that I'll ask all of you. How can all the developers in the room, how can you double your affordable housing output in the next 20 years? How can you triple it, right? How can local government help you get there? If you can double your output, I think you're going to find a lot. If you can tell them how you can double your output through their collaboration with them, I think you're going to find a lot of fans when you're talking with planners and planning commissions. And then what to avoid, again, generalities. Again, we always use permitting and permitting timelines as a great example. Yes, permitting should be faster. Give me the specific examples to help us move that along. What are those specific barriers in the process? Wild ideas, and then also I'll just lump in things that are not under the control of the jurisdiction. I've been to, in my former life, I remember going to a lot of affordable housing developer and advocate meetings, and when talking about legislative agendas, oftentimes folks would ask, what's the big priority this year? And there's always somebody in the room that says an income tax to fund affordable housing. Number one, local jurisdictions, they can't impose an income tax. Number two, great idea. That's not something that a local planner is going to be able to utilize when they're trying to figure out how do we remove some of these barriers to building more housing in our community. So also, and Tiffany said it a minute ago, what is under the control of these local jurisdictions for them to be able to facilitate more opportunities to build more housing and more affordable housing. And with that, I'm going to bring it to a close and welcome Laura and Tiffany up. And if there are any questions, fire away.
Yeah, back, yeah.
Hi, my name is Brent Butler, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Jefferson County. I have two questions. One of them goes to the new legislation regarding some of the requirements for ADUs. And then I have a second question about pro forma. First question.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. And should I repeat that?
Just the 2 questions.
Two questions. Short ADUs. The question there is, for time immemorial, we would tell an individual that, yes, you can build an ADU, but you cannot sell that ADU. That ADU is connected to that property. That's an illegal subdivision that we do not permit. My understanding is that's no longer the case. So that's question one. Question two is, I work for a local government. We're not developers. So when a person says this pro forma works, and they say, oh, we need to have 160 units, you're only allowing 40. How do we truth that?
So on the first one with the ADU, thanks. On the first question, previously you said that ADUs cannot be sold separately previously. They can be sold now. They are still subject to staying on, the lot cannot be split. They can be basically condoized. You can sell the unit apart from the land and create a condominium with the ADUs now. That's the what 1337 changed, and we have more details on it in our ADU guidance.
So that asks a whole bunch of questions about property tax and all the other shared expenses, but I don't know, does the bill discuss that as well?
It did not go into that level of detail, no, and I'm not sure if we have all that detail in our guidance, but if there's a piece in there that we don't have, let us know. We can look into that information for you. The second, on the pro forma, we realize that's a piece of information that's really important to for planners to understand, is when developers come to the table and they say, well, this doesn't pencil, well, does it really not pencil? You're not always going to show us your math. Some developers are interested in showing the math, and I think some affordable housing developers are more likely to do that. We did recently get some legislative funding to do a pro forma tool for the Puget Sound region for middle housing. We don't yet have that expanded yet, but we hear this request, and we might be able to see, I'm not sure what we have in the tool budget yet, but work with the affordable housing developers who are willing to work with you to provide that information so that you can work with them and gain knowledge. And two, I'll put in a request to my boss Ann here and see what funding we have to do a pro forma tool on the state level. But if you are in the King, Pierce, Snohomish, Kitsap counties, we do have a pro forma tool available for middle housing that is available that will help you to understand what you can and cannot do and what affordability level it gets you and how many units it gets you. And it may be transferable to you if you can tweak the numbers a little bit. So, all right, one more question. Did you have a question?
Yeah, but I'll ask anyway, just on the off chance that didn't really cover it. So with your guidance that's already exists on the implementation of 1110, I remember you mentioned that there are some jurisdictions that are still, putting into place things that would burden I won't say low to kind of mid-rise, basically burden middle housing more than single family housing. I'm wondering if you could speak more to some examples of those things that are being put into, that local jurisdictions are putting into place. So essentially, just for the context, right now, I'm working a lot on the local level with different cities in King County that are working on a comprehensive plans right now, and I'm kind of trying to keep my ear to the ground to see, it's okay, is this, going to be good to developmental housing, or is this overly burdensome?
Was it with regards to that last point that I made, that local governments can't put certain regulations on affordable housing that they don't on others?
Precisely.
So we are seeing some local governments put into place some, I think, what are fear-based regulations that basically say if you have very extremely low-income housing, so 0 to 30% AMI housing or permanent supportive housing, particularly permanent supportive housing, that you have to have a security plan in place. You cannot have the fire department come to more than so many times a month, or you have to do these kind of obscure random things. You have to allow the fire marshal to go into the units unannounced, or random pieces, things, because of fear and concerns about externalities that may or may not happen, that they wouldn't require for a regular apartment building.
Cultural war nonsense.
Yeah, and they are, in a way, illegal. So if you see that in your local government, we recommend you call them out on it, particularly mention it to the Washington Fair Housing Authority, and they can work to rectify that situation. If we have commented on it, or you have commented on it, you have a chance to bring it to the Growth Management Hearings Board and use that tool as well. But essentially, they're using development regulations to prohibit certain types of development based out of externalities and fears. Yeah, and we have a point of contact on that if you want to connect with me. I have an expert who can answer any questions you have.
Laura, I got one quick question back here.
Sure.
Hi, I have a question about governing the local governance over local government listening to the voices of the housing advocates.
Yes.
Here in Tacoma, they deployed their Housing for All initiative, and I participated in all of the meetings, the virtual meetings. I provided feedback as a housing provider, as an equitable housing provider. I provided feedback. I even asked questions via email that were never answered. And the piece of the Housing for All that was supposed to address our specific housing model was completely left out of the initiative results. And I'm not the only one. There's other housing providers that we created our own systems to assist to relieve the housing crisis and remove access barriers. And we're kind of just like Tay in the wind because they did not create what they initially said they were going to create with the rezoning policy. So how, and they have not answered any of our concerns, questions, or comments.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. If the planners are not responsive, I would elevate the concerns either to a higher level at the planning department or the planning commission, or even your city council elected official, and bring that to their attention with specific evidence. I doubt it was an oversight in this case, but sometimes coming with that information to the next level and say, I want to give this person the benefit of the doubt, but this is the situation. Is there any way you can rectify it? If you are on record, hopefully they'll be able to work with you. And if you have, if you have any other questions, please feel free to come up and ask. Thank you all so much for coming. We appreciate you, and comment on your plans.